Hi, welcome back. We are going to start wrapping up our unit on Hinduism. We're still talking about internal and external challenges. We talked about the internal challenges of Jainism and Buddhism last time. Today we want to talk about Islam and the West. Now you might be wondering, what is a core question, Dr. Burton, that's going to come from this section? I would like you to tell me what are the two internal challenges and what are the two external challenges, and explain each. These are internal and external challenges to Hinduism. Explain each. So we're going to continue with talking now about Islam. Islam is a religion that begins in 632 Common Era. It expands in the area of the fallen Roman Empire and continues to expand into India. By the 1400s, it reaches, no, actually, it's earlier than that. Let's see if I have dates on my handout here. If not, it'll come up in our unit on Islam. So the Muslims overtook the Indian people. They invaded and dominated in India for 300 to 400 years. During this time, they suppressed the Indian system of practice. They can't suppress the beliefs, but the practice. This created a lot of bad feelings between both sides, and they are considered external challenges to one another. Eventually, Islam goes into corruption and collapses in India. So I have dates here. Here we go. They were in control from about 1400, so I was right, to 1750. And Islam in India decays and collapses. And then from 1715 to 1948, the British, who are Christians, come and conquer India. And they influence through colonization of India. So for almost 550 years, India was under the rule of others who had a radically different philosophy. They tended to become resigned and accommodating during that time, maybe because of the teaching of ahimsa, no harm, no violence. Many from the lower castes converted to Islam. And today, what's happening in India is a revival of the Hindu spirit and Hindu identity. So since 1948 to now, there's been a kind of Hindu nationalism going on. And you can even see this with President Modi, who is the president now. There's a lot of pride and national pride and religious pride resurfacing. So they want to almost go back to the past of Hinduism, before Islam came in. So let's talk about the contrast between Islam and Hinduism. They're very, very, very different. Very different. Let's talk about their beliefs. So in Islam, they're strict monotheists. So remember, theism, God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, unchangeable. Islam is going to affirm that. And this is in contrast to pantheism and polytheism in Hinduism. Very different basic beliefs. Islam believes in the equality of all humans. Contrast this with the caste system where there's a hierarchy. Islam is willing to use warfare in conversion, at least in the past. And Hinduism is going to assert a kind of non-violence ahimsa. Islam affirms the resurrection of the body. So humans have a body and a soul. The soul begins at conception and it continues forever. At some point, the soul that is separated from the body at death will be reunited with the body in a resurrected form. Contrast this with reincarnation in Hinduism. Those are very different. Resurrection is very different from reincarnation. It is because Muslims did not hold to reincarnation but resurrection on a practical level that there is such a big difference between the two systems. Monotheism and resurrection versus pantheism and reincarnation. If there's one life only, then this life is ultimately important And perhaps Islam lasted so long in India because Hindus thought we can outlast them, by doing our duty and practicing nonviolence. We'll get good karma and come back again. Okay, so we'll talk more about Islam and some of the contrasts. So we're also going to talk about it down here when we talk about responses. All right, Christianity and the British. So the West, Christianity and secularism. This is a big challenge to all the religions. Christianity is also a monotheistic religion. They don't believe in reincarnation. They believe in resurrection. Christianity does not believe in jihad or fighting for converts. Although there are periods where Christians engaged in war, holy war, it is not a teaching in Christianity. Secularism is the separation of church and state in one way, but it's also the emphasis on this world only. We don't talk about transcendent reality in secularism. Both have been imported to India within the last 200 years. And the question is, should India be a Hindu nation and adopt a practice different than what secular nations do, separation of church and state? Should Hindu be a Hindu nation or a secular nation? This is a hot topic even today. Hindu nationalism says, no, we should be a Hindu state. There's no separation between religion and government. Pakistan, the next door neighbor of India, is a Muslim state. And India was partitioned. Pakistan becomes a Muslim state in 1948 when the British leave. They give up colonialism. And because there are many Muslims in India and there's this bad relationship between Hindus and Muslims, those who are living in India as Muslims got a place of their own. Pakistan's a nation that is Muslim. And they do have tensions at the border and they still fight. So in India, 1948, there was no established religion. It's a secular democratic state. But in the past 50 years, Hinduism has attempted to assert itself. So there's tension within India, separation of church and state, secular questions, and then there's tension between the Muslim state of Pakistan and the Hindu, not really Hindu state, but predominantly Hindu state of India. So how do Hindus respond to these challenges? So here are some of the responses. I'm just going to summarize it for you, and then we will wrap up our unit on Hinduism. So what about Buddhism? The Buddha left home and a lot of other people followed. Buddhists reject metaphysical speculation for mystical experience. The emphasis is on spiritual learning of the self. The way Buddhism challenged Hinduism is by bringing in the ascetic element and non-violent element. And these get incorporated into Hinduism as the fourth stage of life, the stage where you pursue moksha as a goal. And Hinduism had to incorporate these elements so as not to lose converts to Buddhism. About 300 before Common Era, Buddhism almost became the national religion of India through the Emperor Ashoka. There's a great movie, Ashoka, or maybe it's just Ashok, but I think it's Ashoka, Ashoka, about this period of Indian history. He tried to spread Buddhism in India, but the Brahmins in Hinduism were not going to give up their power, so they incorporated some Buddhist teachings into their system. Buddhism lost political power, and the Brahmins fought back Buddhism, and eventually Buddhism had to expand elsewhere. It got pushed out of India. It's a missionary religion, and it actively sought to make converts because they were not really tied into the caste system. They could do this. So they could leave India. And there was a kind of equality in Buddhism, so anyone could convert. So it went to other areas such as Tibet, Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, China, Japan, and the western portion of the United States, California. We will talk more about Buddhism. Okay, Islam began around 632 Common Era, and by the 10th and 12th centuries, it develops and expands. There are great battles fought between Muslims and Europeans. France and Spain, they almost got into France and Spain. By 1400, the Muslims had invaded and had control of India. All of India held to and taught that all is one. Now Islam is here saying all is not one. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And the Muslim faith is dead set against all forms of idolatry. So in India, they find all these gods, and Islam doesn't even allow you to paint pictures. So there was a lot of conflict, let's just say. And the Muslims engaged in a kind of jihad or holy war when they come to India. All right, and this is not acceptable in terms of practice in India when they have this idea of ahimsa. Okay, so how do they respond? First response is through synthesis. So Sikhs are an offshoot of this conflict. Sikhs attempt to synthesize Hindu and Muslim beliefs and practices. We have a large Sikh community here in Phoenix, Arizona, if you're my student. They are more Hindu than Muslim in their conception of God or ultimate reality, and they were very militant for a time and were known as brave warriors. Many have the last name Singh, which means lion or great courage, and it's connected to the lion. They became a caste in India. Guru Nanak is the founder of Sikhism, and he lived between 469 and 1539. So you can research more on the Sikhs and their religion and how they are a response to Islam. Okay, now we're going to talk about these responses down here. Number 8, responses of Hinduism. Ramakrishna and Vivekananda are both teachers. Ramakrishna lives about 1836 to 1886, and Rama is an avatar of Krishna. Vivekananda is bliss. So this is going to be a version of Vedantic Hinduism, and it's a mystical and philosophical version. It's taught between the 1880s and 1950s. Vivekananda is a disciple of Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna tried to get a vision of the god or goddess and tried to find union with the god in devotional religion. He had a mystical experience which Vivekananda explained philosophically in a way consistent with Vedantic philosophy that all is one. Vivekananda brought this teaching to the West through the First World Congress of Religion in 1893. This is a very fascinating World Congress. I think I may have mentioned it early on in our lectures. When the West started to hear this teaching about monism, all is one, they started to become very impressed by the philosophical level of reflection that occurred in history in India. And a new respect was found and given to them by the West. People started translating and reading texts from India, particularly Max Muller, who is maybe considered the first to start religious studies as a discipline. So religious studies begins with translating the Vedas and studying Hinduism because it's so new and different to the West. They start to think that philosophical Hinduism or monism is a more suitable answer to life's questions than their own position. So there was a demand and a sympathetic audience in the West, and so the East came west. And this is in the 1800s. And if you've read any of the transcendentalists in American philosophy, they were studying the Vedas. They were studying the Gita. And they had an influence in the United States. Okay, so that's one response, Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. Another response to recent challenges were the reform movements of the Arya Samaj and the Brahmo Samaj. So I'm going to draw your attention back to this page. And I believe they were on here. Maybe it was on the original Hinduism page. All right, I'm wrong. It's not on this page. It's on the other page where we were looking at Hindu philosophy, or Hindu gods. And I can't get to the text box. Oh, here it is. It'll let me get there. Okay, let's look at... you know what? I'll just pause this so you don't have to endure my searching around. Let me pause. I pulled up in Wikipedia Arya Samaj and Brahmo Samaj. You can just pull up Wikipedia and put those terms in there and learn more about these reform movements. I'll just summarize. The Arya Samaj was looking back to the Aryans. Remember, the Aryans were the Indo-European invaders. It was a back to the Veda movement, and it was a movement to go back to the pure teachings of the Vedas before it was corrupted by mixing with other pieces through the centuries. So remember, Hinduism develops. This is going back to a kind of pure Aryan religion, and they have no temples, no caste, no idols or images of the gods. And the early Vedas did not speak of reincarnation, so they don't have that. It's a kind of a Puritan movement within Hinduism. Another way of reform was the Brahmo Samaj. So I'll pull that up. And this is a rationalistic interpretation of Hinduism. It attempts to mix Western rationalism, which is a philosophy in the West, and Hinduism, a secular philosophy with Hindu religion. It gave a more rational, pure, and hopeful type of religion. They accepted whatever reason could support, and they dropped whatever was not necessary by reason. This happened in other traditions such as liberal Christianity and Reform Judaism, which we will learn about soon. It is a move to drop tradition and keep what reason approved. So you can see the Arya Samaj is going back to the pure Vedas. Brahmo Samaj is going to side more with secularism, rationalism, and what reason leads us to drop the tradition. We're going to see that this is something that happens in several of the religions as a response to the challenge of secularism. All right, now let's talk a little bit about the Gandhi and his way of responding to the colonization by the British. Gandhi was able to expose the fact that the British were not ruling because they were morally superior, but rather because they had superior force, power, and were willing to use it to maintain power. So he is working for social justice. It's a similar movement back then. Gandhi used age-old ideas in Indian thought, ahimsa, no harm, and karma yoga to effectuate change in India. The problem was that he appealed to the will without much rational persuasion, which is something that we're seeing today in similar movements in the United States. I guess it's a global movement now. But appealing to the will or action or force, it's not appealing to belief. And religion, remember, is at the level of belief. And he came into conflict with others in India who wanted to uphold the caste distinction. He didn't critique the caste system at the level of ideas and philosophy. He comes into conflict with them, and he wanted to argue that Indians were equal to the British, and the British seemed to buy that. But the implication was also that all Indians were equal. And he didn't make his argument very strongly with the Indians. They wanted to continue the caste system. This led to much violence in India, and an Orthodox Hindu ended up shooting Gandhi, and he believed Gandhi was violating Dharma by dismissing and diminishing the caste system. So you can see, although Gandhi was using elements of Hinduism to challenge the British, he didn't address Hinduism at the level of belief, and he didn't challenge the caste system and where there are inequalities in the caste system, and so this led to conflict and violence. Okay, now the last piece is gurus, swamis, and the New Age movement. Between the 1960s and the 1990s, India came west. West meaning the United States and Europe. Part of this was through the Beatles, the band The Beatles, visiting India and bringing Hinduism and particularly teachings about Krishna through their music. In the 60s, this is the Vietnam era, they're searching for a more satisfying way of life and a need for meaning, and they're doing mind expansion through drugs. Timothy Leary was a famous professor at Harvard. He had this statement, tune in, turn on, and drop out. And he became kind of an apostle of enlightenment. The 1960s hippies culture spread Eastern teachings. And they thought you can get even higher states of consciousness through meditation. So they started with drugs, gateway drugs. Drugs are a gateway to enlightenment through yoga. How about that? And this is also where we get the New Age movement. Have you been to Sedona? They have this metaphysical bookshop up there, and it's very Eastern stuff. Another way this came... Hinduism came to popular culture was through the Bhakti movement and devotion to Krishna and the Hare Krishna movement in the United States. So this is young people converting to Hinduism through the Hare Krishna movement. They're seeking meaning, and the Western religions or secularism was not providing that meaning. So the Hare Krishna movement is a way that people in the West converted, let's say, to Eastern religion. Okay, I'm going to pause here and summarize where we've been. We've gone a long ways. I spent a lot of time talking about Hinduism because it's old and it's deep, and I kind of like it. I like thinking about these things. So we started with the Indus Valley people and the Aryans and the conflict there and the influences to Hinduism from those people groups. We talked about Vedic religion and the Vedas and what's in those teachings. We talked about epic religion and the epic stories of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and the laws of Manu. We talked about devotional religion and the main gods, Vishnu, Shiva, and the divine female. We talked about the main concepts of Hinduism, and I had you add one in here, Brahman. And we talked about philosophical religion and the orthodox philosophies in Hinduism. And then we talked about internal and external challenges of Jainism, Buddhism, and Islam in the West, and what the responses to those challenges were. I will write up the core questions for the unit on Hinduism, and then I will see you in the videos that start the unit on Buddhism. So Buddhism, remember, comes out of Hinduism. It's an internal challenge. And I will see you in the next videos. Thanks for joining me.